I always thought my life was set, a quiet, invisible existence on the edges of a family that celebrated my brother's success while I faded further into the shadows. My name is Ellery Quinn, and for years I accepted being the forgotten son, the one no one really saw or cared about. But when my father died, everything changed in a way I couldn't have imagined. What I thought was just a rundown cabin turned out to be a key to a secret that would shatter everything I believed about my family and myself. This isn't just a story about inheritance or betrayal. It's about what happens when the past you thought you knew hides a truth so big it threatens to destroy everything. If you're ready to hear how a life of silence became a fight for justice and something far greater than I ever expected, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story hits you the hardest? Your support means everything, and I promise this journey is just beginning. My name is Ellery Quinn. I'm 34, a quiet man with rust red hair, square glasses that always slide down my nose, and a wardrobe that hasn't changed in 10 years. I work at a small library in Scranton, Pennsylvania, surrounded by dusty novels and forgotten memoirs. That's where I find peace, among silence and stories, far from the echo chamber of my family's expectations. But peace is fragile. The day I stepped into Wexler and Hartman LLP, everything shifted. I didn't expect much. My relationship with my father, Elias Quinn, had always been more polite than paternal. He was a hard man, disciplined, cold, the kind of father who saw weakness in softness and measured his children by their utility. Emery, my younger brother, was everything he valued: sharp, charming, ruthless. I was not. I arrived at the law office that day out of obligation, not hope. The waiting room reeked of polished mahogany and old grief. Inside the conference room, Emery sat like he owned the place already, legs crossed in tailored navy slacks, eyes flicking through his phone, his Rolex catching the light. Mother was there too, perched like a queen in mourning, though she'd shed no tears. Her gaze slid past me like I was just another piece of furniture. Mr. Wexler, our family attorney for over 30 years, stood and cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, placing a small digital recorder on the polished table. He pressed play, and my father's voice, as severe in death as it was in life, filled the room. "This is Elias Quinn. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. To my beloved son, Emery Quinn, I leave the Arden-Moore estate in Vermont. Take care of your mother. You've always demonstrated leadership. I expected that." I'd have been shocked if it were any different. Still, something twisted inside me hearing it spoken aloud. The word beloved landed like a slap. The lawyer paused, glanced at me, then continued. "To my other son, Ellery, I leave the Jefferson Hollow cabin. It belonged to your grandfather. You've always preferred quiet places. I hope this one brings you peace." There it was. That was all. No praise, no affection, just a cabin in the middle of nowhere and a vague wish for serenity. Emery looked up from his phone and gave me that grin, the one he used to wear when he beat me at chess and Dad praised him for his tactical mind. "Well," he said, mock solemn, "I suppose Arden-Moore needs a real man to handle it." I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach churned. "Guess I'm the lucky one," I murmured, forcing a thin smile. "Nothing like a remote cabin to stretch out and disappear." Mother didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any insult. The rest of the reading was a blur. Legal jargon, signatures, the scent of aging paper. Emery leaned over to Mr. Wexler to discuss transition timelines. I pocketed the key to the cabin, a rusted, old-fashioned thing tied with a red string, and the address on a folded slip of paper. Outside, the wind had picked up. November in Pennsylvania is all steel skies and brittle leaves. As I stepped out into the cold, I looked down at the paper again. Route 49, Appalachian Ridge, Jefferson Hollow. It sounded like the name of a ghost town. Back in my apartment that evening, I sat in the one chair that didn't wobble and stared at the ceiling. The cabin wasn't the issue. I didn't care about real estate. It was the message. It was always about the message. I was the afterthought. The background. The child who prefers hiding. As if I hadn't spent my entire life trying to be seen. I thought back to the last time my father and I had spoken one-on-one. It was at Emery's promotion party, VP of Dad's investment firm at 26. I had brought a first edition of a rare novel as a gift, hoping to connect. My father barely glanced at it before handing it to a staff member. "You always did have a thing for useless things," he'd said, sipping his bourbon. That sentence had clung to me for years. Now I laughed under my breath. Useless had inherited a cabin. Emery, the golden boy, got the estate, the firm, the legacy. He'd already redecorated half the Ardmore property before Dad passed. It was always just a matter of paperwork. But me? I was now the proud owner of a wooden shack somewhere in the Appalachian woods, gifted with the dignity of being forgotten. I ran my fingers over the key. Something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the tone. Dad's voice in the recording had sounded clipped, careful, like he was hiding something. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that. Maybe I couldn't face the truth that he really did see me as a mistake. Still, something in me stirred. Curiosity, maybe. Or defiance. Maybe this was the moment. As I turned off the light in my apartment, I paused in the doorway, looking at the empty chair where I'd sat the night before. This was it. No more silence. No more fading into the wallpaper. I drove northeast, out of Scranton, through back roads and wooded towns that blurred into one another. The highway eventually narrowed to a cracked two-lane road, framed by barren trees that rattled in the wind like bones. By mid-afternoon, I found the sign, Jefferson Hollow. Population unreadable, the paint too faded to tell. The directions led me deeper into the woods, and soon the GPS gave up entirely. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt. When I finally pulled into the clearing, I stared in disbelief. The cabin was there, larger than expected, not just a shack, but a two-story structure with a steep roof and a narrow porch covered in dry leaves. Moss clung to the stone foundation, and ivy wrapped around the wooden beams like a sleeping serpent. But it wasn't decrepit. It wasn't forgotten. It was preserved, maintained, cared for. Which didn't make sense, not for a place that hadn't been mentioned in over 20 years. I stepped out of the car, key in hand, and approached the front door. The moment the key slid into the lock, something in the air shifted, like the woods exhaled. The door creaked open into darkness. I stood on the threshold, heartbeat louder than my thoughts. Then I stepped inside. The air smelled like cedar and dust. Furniture was covered in white sheets, undisturbed. A grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, though I never saw it wind. On the far wall was a fireplace, and above it, a photograph I didn't expect to see, my grandfather, Henry Quinn, in his army uniform, smiling that half smile of his. I hadn't seen that photo in decades. As I pulled the sheets off the furniture, I realized something. This place wasn't abandoned. Someone had been here recently. The shelves were clean. There were canned goods in the pantry, dated within the year, batteries in the drawer, even a working lantern. That evening, I lit the fire and sat in the armchair, trying to piece it all together. Why would my father give me this place? Why keep it a secret for so long? And why did it feel like it was waiting for me? The next day, I got my answer, sort of. I heard the car before I saw it, tires crunching gravel. I stepped onto the porch and saw a black luxury SUV pulling into the clearing. I recognized the license plate immediately. Emery. He stepped out, dressed like he'd come from a photo shoot, camel coat, scarf tossed just so, aviator sunglasses. He gave me a long, theatrical once-over and said, "Wow, it's even more tragic in person." I didn't answer. I didn't own conversation. But he didn't need a reply. He thrived on his own monologue. "Dad must have really wanted to exile you," he continued, walking toward the porch like he owned the ground. "I mean, a cabin in the woods, no signal, no plumbing." He laughed. "That's not inheritance, Ellery. That's banishment." I stayed silent. Let him fill the air with his noise. Let him stretch the stage. He took out his phone, pointed it at the cabin, and started recording a video. "Okay, followers," he said, switching to influencer mode. "Check this out. This is what happens when you spend your life reading books instead of making deals. This is my brother's new mansion." He panned across the trees and the porch, and finally my face. "Say hi, Ellery. Don't look so embarrassed. Everyone needs a forest retreat, right?" He laughed again, the same way he used to when we were kids and he'd trip me in front of the neighborhood kids. I should have told him to leave. I should have grabbed the phone from his hand and tossed it into the fire. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching him as he put his performance online, racking up views from strangers who didn't know the difference between sarcasm and cruelty. Within hours, the video had gone viral. I found out when my coworker from the library texted me a link with a nervous emoji. The video was titled, "When Your Brother Gets the Estate and You Get the Shed." Comments poured in, laughing emojis, pitying jokes, some calling me Wilderness Willie or Bookworm Banishment. The most liked comment said, "At least Bigfoot will have company now." I should have been used to this by now. The humiliation. The way Emery turned everything into a joke, especially me. But something was different this time. Something inside me didn't shrink. It seethed. That night, I walked out into the woods behind the cabin, letting the cold air scrape against my skin. I walked until I couldn't hear the road, until all I could hear was the whisper of trees and the crunch of frost beneath my boots. It was nearly pristine. I ran my fingers over the mantel, then stood and examined the photo of my grandfather again. This cabin had been preserved, not abandoned. Someone had cared for it recently and thoroughly. But who? And why? I hadn't seen or heard from anyone since arriving, except Emery, and he sure as hell wasn't dusting baseboards or refilling the pantry with fresh supplies. Something didn't sit right. I pulled open drawers and cupboards, looking for clues. In the kitchen, a yellow notepad caught my attention. On it, someone had written numbers, dates, and a tight, blocky script. The most recent one was just 6 weeks ago. October 3rd. No names. No tasks. Just a single line, check seal, October 3rd. The rest of the pad was blank. I found more of the same in the study tucked behind the stairs. A shelf filled with journals, but none of them belonged to me. They were all labeled in the same neat handwriting. Henry Quinn, my grandfather. Some entries were dated 20 years ago. Others, surprisingly, were recent, 2016, 2018, even 2021. I flipped through the latest. He wrote about testing conduits, confirming alignments, vault recalibration, and once, a vague note that made my chest tighten: "Elias can't know it's still active. He won't understand." Elias. My father. I read the sentence again and again. What wouldn't he understand? What was it? Something clicked in me, quiet and cold, like the snapping of a dead twig underfoot. My father had exiled me to this place not to shame me, but to bury something. Or hide it. Maybe both. I kept reading. In one entry, from November 2018, my grandfather mentioned something beneath the cabin. Access through the stone seam under the hall cabinet. Seal still firm. Lock still functional. Will require voice or biological match if I don't make it back. I reread that 3 times. My hands had gone still, and I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Something was under this house. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Something real. I stood up slowly, turned to the hall, and eyed the wooden cabinet near the entryway. It looked ordinary. 4 drawers, aged brass handles, scuffed corners. I knelt and pulled the lowest drawer. Empty. I tapped along the back panel. Hollow. I ran my palm along the baseboard until I felt it, a hairline seam in the floor, too straight, too precise to be a construction flaw. I pressed gently. Nothing happened. Then, unsure of what else to try, I spoke. "Henry Quinn." My voice cracked slightly. Nothing. I swallowed and tried again. "Ellery Quinn." There was a click, a low mechanical whir. Then the panel shifted. The drawer shuddered and slid back in. A small square of floor lifted slightly. I pulled it open. Beneath it was a metal hatch with a biometric scanner embedded into its surface, dustless, well-maintained. A keypad blinked faintly. My pulse quickened. I pressed my finger to the scanner. It buzzed red. Denied. I exhaled and tried again, this time speaking my full name. Ellery Henry Quinn. A soft tone. Green light. The hatch released. My breath caught. I lifted the hatch fully, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. A cold draft rose from the void. I hesitated, grabbed the lantern from the fireplace, and flicked it on. With the light in one hand and a heavy wrench in the other, I descended slowly. The stairs creaked under my weight, but they held firm. The walls narrowed around me, stone and steel, until I reached the bottom. What I found was not a basement. It was a chamber. Smooth metallic walls, no dust, no cobwebs. A faint hum filled the space, electrical and low, like a distant power source. There were panels on the walls, blinking softly, green, blue, a few yellow. In the center of the room stood a console shaped like a half-moon desk. Wires trailed from the floor into the back of it, and on the surface were more journals. I stepped forward, heart thudding. The journals here were newer, bound in leather. One was open. My grandfather's handwriting again, but sloppier, more rushed. The last entry read, "If Ellery finds this, it means I failed." Or he succeeded. Either way, he's the last one who can make it work. He has the key. He is the key. The key? What key? The rusted cabin key? The metaphorical kind? I didn't know. I just knew that I had stepped into something much larger than I'd imagined. I sat on the bench beside the console and placed my hands on the leather. My fingers trembled. I hadn't expected to find answers in the woods. I hadn't even expected questions. But now the entire floor beneath me buzzed with secrets, and somehow my name was written on all of them. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the chamber until morning, reading page after page of engineering diagrams, strange formulas, and personal notes filled with regret, warnings, and unresolved guilt. My grandfather's journals became my scripture. His entries chronicled years of secret development, trial and error, notes scribbled about materials I didn't understand, phrases like dimensional harmonics, micro-oscillations, and repeated warnings in all caps must remain undiscovered by Elias. My father, the man who'd never invited me into his world, the one who passed down inheritance through cold merit and blunt hierarchy. The man who had, according to my grandfather, tried to dismantle the very project I now sat in the middle of. Somewhere between page 117 and 134 of Journal 4, I stopped seeing my grandfather as just a kind old man with calloused hands and a love for black coffee. He had been something else entirely, a builder, a keeper of knowledge, someone who deliberately distanced himself from the family name to protect whatever this place was. On the third morning, I woke to find frost edging the inside of the window panes and a peculiar hum vibrating faintly through the floorboards. I thought it was my imagination at first, but when I stepped into the hall, the sound grew stronger, still low, like a power source warming up. I followed it back to the hidden hatch. This time, when I descended, the console at the center wasn't blinking faintly. It was active. A small holographic projection floated above it, displaying a slowly rotating geometric shape, like a sphere and cube had merged and been folded into themselves. I reached out instinctively, and as my fingers neared the projection, a panel beside the console slid open with a hiss. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it, Ellery, handwritten in blue ink I recognized immediately. My grandfather's. I tore it open with shaking hands. The letter inside was brief, direct, and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Ellery, if you're reading this, then the seal has responded to your signature. You've passed the activation threshold. The device you see is called the Virgil node. It doesn't belong in this world, and it's never been completed, not safely. Your father tried to extract it, to sell it, to militarize it. I blocked him. But if it wakes now, it means you've reconnected it, possibly just by existing near it. You must not let Emery or Elias's associates near this place. I trusted you because you see the world in patterns, not just profit. If I'm gone, it's yours to decide. Shut it down forever or finish it. But if you choose the latter, you'll need to unlock what I couldn't, the last memory fragment. And it's in you. Love, Henry. I read it again and again, and then I sat down because my legs could no longer hold me. The last memory fragment is in you. What did that even mean? I didn't remember anything unusual. No great secrets whispered to me as a child. No scientific inheritance. And yet, something about that line tugged at a place deep in my chest, like a long-forgotten string finally pulled. That afternoon, I opened the large wooden trunk at the base of the basement stairs, one I hadn't noticed before. Inside were childhood relics, mine. A wooden plane I'd carved with my grandfather. A small puzzle box with my initials burned into the side. A faded Polaroid of the two of us fishing on Lake Renner when I was maybe 6 years old. And in the corner, a thin book with a red leather cover labeled EQ Training Log 1989. I froze. Training? I hadn't trained for anything. I opened it slowly. Inside were entries in my grandfather's hand, detailing daily activities from the summer I turned 6, coded memory games, shape sequencing, verbal prompts, followed by periods of observation. Subject EQ demonstrated strong harmonic memory response today, able to reconstruct pattern from auditory input after a 4-hour gap. Another, EQ responded to visual cue triggers with elevated alpha wave activity. Preliminary neural bonding successful. Subject, response, trigger, bonding. I felt like the ground was slipping. These weren't summer bonding activities between grandfather and grandson. They were experiments, carefully designed, structured, and observed. And I'd been the subject. I sat in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the weight of this revelation. My own memories were suddenly called into question. Had I really just loved the puzzles, the stories, the games, or had those been implants? Was I simply part of a larger protocol, part of Henry Quinn's last great project? And then the memory hit. It was like something unzipped in my mind. A flash of heat, a wooden table, the scent of turpentine and old coffee. I was 6. My grandfather was holding a strange object that pulsed faintly with blue light. He said, "Hold it steady. Don't think about what it is. Just feel the rhythm." I remembered now, the object humming in my palm like it was alive. And I remembered a sudden jolt, a sound like thunder underwater. Then nothing. The memory had been buried. On purpose. My breath came fast and shallow. He hadn't just been training me. He had been linking me to something. I made coffee, if only to have something hot to hold, then opened my laptop and connected to the local satellite link installed discreetly in the back of the kitchen cabinet, a detail I'd noticed earlier but hadn't thought much about. It was state-of-the-art, hidden behind wood paneling, and not cheap. Definitely not something my father would have wasted on a shack in the woods, which meant it had been put there for someone's use. Likely mine. Likely intended for this moment. I booted into a VPN and began searching for anything tied to the Virgil node, Project Virgil, Henry Quinn's work, or even my father's private assets. Most of it was a brick wall, redacted files, closed government contracts, and ghost companies all filtering through dummy accounts. But after 2 hours, I hit something. A string of email backups leaked during a breach of a minor defense contractor 3 years ago. Nothing high profile, which is probably why they hadn't been scrubbed as tightly. One name kept recurring in the correspondence, Emery. Not my father, my brother. I clicked through the threads, and my stomach turned with each new file. Emery had known about the node. Not just known, he'd been trying to find it. For years. There were mentions of phase reclamation, asset QH7, which I now suspected was me, and internal memos that described our cabin, my cabin, as Zone Red. Emery had partnered with a private research firm, Arclight Intelligence, a black ops shell if I'd ever seen one, to track down what they called Henry Quinn's anomaly. One particular exchange made my blood run cold. It was dated 6 months ago. From emery.quinn@ethercapital.net to d.michaels@arclight.io. Subject, next steps. Body, Ellery won't pose a problem. He's disconnected, harmless. The key is definitely genetic. Henry would have embedded the protocol in someone compliant. I've arranged for the property transfer under the assumption the site will activate. Once confirmed, we proceed with removal. There it was. In Emery's own words. He hadn't just known, I was a part of his plan. A pawn. I was given the cabin not out of pity or disdain, but because they believed I would activate the node quietly, unknowingly, and they'd sweep in afterward to collect it. I stood up so fast the chair clattered to the floor. The room tilted. Emery had manipulated everything, played the will, played my father's legacy, played me. And the worst part? It had almost worked. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and called the only person from my old life who might believe me. Caroline Park, a journalist I had dated years ago who now covered high-tech corruption for a major investigative outlet. She answered on the third ring. "Ellery?" she said, surprised, groggy. "It's 6:30 in the morning. I need your help," I said without preamble. "I'm sending you files. You need to look through them. Emery's involved in something that goes beyond business, Caroline. This is national security level stuff. Are you okay?" she asked, now fully awake. "Where are you?" "I'm in Jefferson Hollow, in the cabin Dad gave me. But this isn't just property. There's something here. Something Grandpa built, and Emery's trying to steal it." "Ellery," she said carefully, "just send me everything. I'll take a look. But if this is real, it's going to get dangerous." It already has. I hung up and transferred the files, then backed them up to 3 secure drives. I burned 2 onto flash sticks, stashing one inside the lining of my duffel and the other behind a false panel in the study's desk drawer. If Emery came, I had to be ready. Not for an argument, for a theft, for a breach. I descended into the chamber again, checked the node. It was humming steadily, brighter than before. Whatever my presence had triggered, it was gaining momentum. I couldn't leave now, and I couldn't let Emery near it. I returned upstairs and placed old hunting traps, ones my grandfather had stored in the shed, in inconspicuous spots around the cabin's perimeter. I didn't know how soon Emery would return, but judging by the emails, he wouldn't wait long. Especially not after the node reactivated. That evening, I received an alert on the satellite terminal. A vehicle had passed the final gate near the trailhead, one only locals used. It was tagged with a priority notice, license plate match. Emery. I shut off all lights, loaded the single rifle my grandfather had kept hidden in the floorboards. Then I waited in the dark. He arrived at dusk, knocked once on the door. "Ellery," he called, voice confident, casual. "You in there?" I said nothing. He knocked again. "Come on. We need to talk. I know you found it." Still, I waited. After 10 minutes, I heard his footsteps recede. But I also heard the crunch of boots on the side of the house. He wasn't alone. I crept to the rear window, saw 2 silhouettes moving along the tree line, armed, dressed in black. Arclight agents. Not just a visit, a retrieval. My breath fogged the glass. My mind raced. I had 30 seconds, maybe less. I triggered the lockdown switch inside the fireplace mantle. The node chamber sealed. The hallway hatch retracted into the wall. Nothing short of an explosive would breach it now. Then I grabbed the flash drive, the rifle, and stepped onto the porch with the barrel raised. "Back away!" I shouted. The 2 men froze. Emery stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "Ellery, don't be dramatic," he said. "We're here to help." "You lied to me," I said. "You knew. You planned this." "It's a discovery," he said, calm as ever. "Do you even know what it is? You're not equipped to handle this." "Neither are you," I snapped. "You don't care what it is. You care what it's worth." "It belongs to the family," he said. "To me. You think Henry wanted you to hide out here forever?" I tightened my grip. "I think he wanted to protect it from people like you." He stepped closer. It's not a weapon, Ellery. It's potential. Untapped. Don't waste it. The agents flanked me. I didn't fire. I didn't have to. I tossed the flash drive into the woods, deep into the shadows. They watched it arc, glint once, and vanish. You'll never find it, I said, and the node's locked. It won't respond to you. Emery's face hardened. For the first time, he looked truly angry. My grandfather hadn't just been a visionary. He had been meticulous, paranoid even, but in a way that now made perfect sense. He had known the day would come when someone would try to exploit the node, and he had prepared for it. I needed to be just as prepared. The encounter with Emery made it clear that Arclight wouldn't stop. Emery was greedy, but he wasn't stupid. He wouldn't risk a second direct approach so soon after being rebuffed. He'd send others, quieter, more professional. I had to move fast, find the node's purpose, and decide what to do with it before they returned. As I reviewed the journals again, something caught my eye that hadn't registered before. A passage from Journal 7. Vault 3 remains sealed. Key requires both bond and command. Not biometric. Not linguistic. Emotional resonance must match stored imprint, Ellery's imprint. Only possible if the sync holds. Vault 3. Until now, I thought the underground chamber was a single structure, one system. But this note implied there were layers, sections still inaccessible. I raced downstairs, hard hammering, and scanned the chamber's walls more carefully. Behind the central console, partially hidden by stacked crates, was a narrow seam in the wall, barely visible. I moved the crates aside and pressed my palm to the metal. Nothing happened. I repeated the word I'd used before, Ellery Henry Quinn. Still nothing. Then I paused. If the entry required not just identification, but emotional resonance, then maybe the trigger wasn't in a phrase or action, but in an experience. I walked back to the node. Its projections still spun silently, like a machine waiting for instruction. I placed my hand on the console and whispered, I remember. The lights dimmed. A low tone sounded, deeper than the previous activations, almost like a heartbeat through stone. Then, the seam in the wall slid open, revealing a dark tunnel lined with faint blue lights. I stepped through, and the door sealed behind me. The tunnel led to a cylindrical chamber, colder than the others, with smooth glass walls and a circular platform in the center. In the middle of that platform sat a pedestal. On it, a small silver cube no larger than a grapefruit, marked with the same strange symbols I had seen in my memory as a child. As I approached, the cube pulsed once, then went still. I reached out and placed my hand on it. Nothing. Then I tried again, this time closing my eyes and letting the memory in, the hum, the warmth of my grandfather's hand, the smell of cedar and coffee. I thought of the exact moment he had said to me, "Don't think. Feel the rhythm." The cube lit up. The walls of the chamber flickered, revealing projections, dozens, maybe hundreds of notes, diagrams, video messages. One projection filled the air, a recording of Henry himself, older than I'd ever seen him, wearing the same flannel vest I found in the closet upstairs. "Ellery," he said, voice strained but clear. "This is the final key. If you're here, the node has accepted you as its primary tether. That means you completed the link, whether intentionally or not." I couldn't finish it. The resonance matrix needed a stable emotional host, someone whose neurological imprint aligned with the original wave frequency. You. It was always you. I didn't tell your father. I couldn't. He wanted control, not balance. He would have weaponized this, turned it into something monstrous. But you listen, you feel. That's why the node chose you. Not for your strength, for your stillness. He looked down for a moment, then back up. You have one choice now. Activate full resonance and let the node reach its final stage, or initiate terminal shutdown and bury it forever. If you choose activation, understand this. What you unlock will not belong solely to you. It will connect. If you choose shutdown, you'll protect everyone from what it might become. Either way, I trust you. The projection vanished. I stood alone in that glowing chamber, the cube now pulsing slowly under my hand. The final key. I had the choice Henry never could make. I sat down beside the pedestal, closed my eyes, and thought. About Emery. About my father. About being called useless, weak, invisible. About the years I'd spent trying to matter in a family that measured worth and profit and power. And then I thought about Henry, how he had quietly, deliberately chosen me. Not for my ambition, but for my clarity. I opened my eyes. The cube blinked once, and a command prompt appeared on the glass wall ahead. Activate shutdown delay. I chose delay. I needed more time. I needed to know what activating meant in practice. I returned to the cabin above, climbed the stairs with the cube in hand, and began examining the projection data I'd copied onto my laptop. I couldn't afford to be impulsive. Henry's warning echoed in my head. This was not just a machine. It was a bridge, a beacon, and once lit, it couldn't be unlit. That night, I cataloged the remaining files. Among them was one final video, one I hadn't expected. A security feed. My father, in the cabin, 10 years ago, standing over the node chamber, arguing with Henry. The message I typed was simple but urgent. Caroline, meet me at the Arden-Moore estate tomorrow. It's time. I hit send and felt a momentary calm before the storm. I had no idea what would happen when I walked into the lion's den, but I had to face it. For myself, for my grandfather, and for everyone else who deserved the truth. I arrived at Arden. More late the next afternoon, the estate sprawling and pristine in the waning autumn light. The kind of place designed to impress and intimidate, every corner polished, every hedge clipped with precision. Security was tight, gated entrance, cameras everywhere, but because I had the official invitation from the family lawyer and Caroline at my side, I was allowed entry. Inside, the air smelled of aged leather and old money. I found Emery in the grand drawing room, speaking to a group of investors, his usual charm in full force. He turned and smiled when he saw me, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Caroline squeezed my arm reassuringly as we stepped forward. The room hushed as the lawyer announced, "We are gathered today to discuss the future of Quinn Enterprises." I took a breath, walking to the front, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on me. "Thank you all for being here," I began, voice steady despite the nerves twisting in my gut. "I am here to present evidence that changes everything you think you know about the company, about the inheritance, and about the man we all respected as Elias Quinn." I clicked the remote, and a screen behind me lit up with emails, contracts, and video footage. Proof of Emery's manipulation, his collusion with Arclight Intelligence, and the secret operations to seize control of the Virgil node. The crowd murmured, some faces pale, others angry. Emery's confident smile faltered. "This is slander," he said, voice rising. "Fabrications designed to undermine my position." "Is it?" I countered. "Or is it the truth?" I played the clip of him emailing about phase reclamation and asset QH7. The investors shifted uneasily. Then I unveiled the security footage of my father and grandfather arguing in the cabin, Elias's desperate attempts to weaponize the node, and Henry's quiet resistance. I saw eyes widen. My voice softened. This node is not just a piece of technology. It's a legacy, a responsibility passed down to me, not because I am strong or ruthless, but because I am the only one who can complete it without destroying everything. A hand shot up from the back of the room. A board member. "And what exactly do you intend to do with this node, Mr. Quinn?" The question hung in the air. I looked at the final key in my pocket and then at the room filled with people who had once seen me as weak. "I intend to finish what my grandfather started, to unlock the potential of the node in a way that benefits humanity, not profits. I intend to lead Quinn Enterprises into a new era of innovation, ethics, and transparency." Caroline's camera caught every moment, every flicker of emotion. The room was tense, divided. Some nodded slowly in tentative approval. Others, especially those loyal to Emery, scowled. Emery himself stood and approached, eyes cold. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ellery. This technology is not meant for idealists. It's power, and power belongs to those who can wield it. And you think you're that person? I challenged. You nearly destroyed everything to get it. The room erupted in quiet arguments and whispers. I sensed the tide shifting, but knew this battle was far from over. The lawyer called for order, and a vote was scheduled to decide the board's stance on my claim. Over the next hours, negotiations unfolded, alliances formed, and threats exchanged behind closed doors. Caroline stayed by my side, documenting everything. When the vote was finally held, I waited in the hallway, heart hammering. The door opened slowly. The chair of the board looked at me and said, "Congratulations, Ellery. You now have controlling interest. The majority voted in your favor." Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Emery and his allies would not simply disappear. They would fight back, hard. That night, standing on the estate's balcony, looking out over the Vermont woods, I felt a mixture of triumph and foreboding. The Virgil node was no longer a secret beneath a forgotten cabin. It was now a centerpiece of the Quinn legacy and a beacon to anyone who knew its value. Caroline was already coordinating with media outlets, preparing for the inevitable press conference that would reveal everything. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. The stakes were enormous. I woke early that day, still feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down like the dense Vermont fog outside the windows. I had never imagined I'd be the one standing before a sea of reporters, corporate stakeholders, and rival executives explaining my grandfather's legacy and the truth about the Virgil node. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit that fit well but didn't shout for attention. And as I walked into the ornate conference room, I noticed Emery sitting across the room. His expression was unreadable, part rage, part defeat, part calculation. The media was lined up, cameras clicking, flashes popping. Caroline sat at my side, her calm presence grounding me. The lawyer gave me a nod, and I stepped up to the podium. "Good morning," I began, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Today marks a turning point, not just for Quinn Enterprises, but for the future we all share. What I'm about to reveal has been hidden in the shadows for far too long. Is a legacy of innovation, sacrifice, and secrecy that my grandfather, Henry Quinn, devoted his life to protecting." I took a breath and gestured to the screen behind me. The first image flashed, a photograph of the Virgil node chamber beneath the cabin, the glowing silver cube pulsing with energy. Gasps rippled through the room. This is the Virgil node, a device far beyond any technology currently in use. It is capable of amplifying and manipulating energy at a molecular level, potentially transforming energy consumption, medical treatments, and communications. But with such power comes risk. The next slide showed the emails, the hidden correspondence revealing Emery's attempts to seize the node for private gain, the ArcLight intelligence operatives, and my father's failed schemes to weaponize the technology. I could feel the room shifting. Some faces hardened, others softened. For years, this technology was a source of conflict within my family. My father and brothers sought to use it for profit and power. My grandfather, however, believed it belonged to the greater good and entrusted me to ensure it would be used responsibly. I paused to let that settle. I stand before you not only as the new CEO, but as the guardian of this legacy. I vow to lead this company with transparency and ethics, harnessing this technology to benefit humanity. Hands shot up immediately. A reporter pressed, "Mr. Quinn, how can you assure the public that this technology won't be misused? What protections are in place?" I answered truthfully, "We are establishing a dedicated oversight committee, including external experts in ethics, technology, and law. The node itself has built-in fail-safes, and its activation requires my unique neurological signature, a safeguard designed by my grandfather." Another question came from a finance analyst, skeptical. "Mr. Quinn, what impact will this shift in company focus have on shareholder value?" I met the gaze calmly. Innovation and ethics are not mutually exclusive from profit. Responsible innovation creates sustainable value. We are committed to creating long-term benefits, not short-term gain. The press conference went on for nearly 2 hours. Caroline's camera captured every moment, broadcasting live across multiple platforms. As questions turned from confrontation to curiosity, I realized something profound was happening. People were beginning to see me not as the overlooked son, but as a leader with vision and integrity. Afterward, the media swarmed Emery. He refused to comment, his silence speaking volumes. Privately, I knew he was plotting his next move. The boardroom was tense the following days. Some executives quietly aligned with me, eager to embrace the new direction. Others whispered resistance, their loyalties uncertain. I had to rebuild trust, not just wield authority. Caroline and I reviewed strategies to manage public perception and secure partnerships with ethical organizations. But the biggest challenge awaited outside the boardroom. The day after the press conference, I received a package at the cabin, a black box, unmarked. Inside was a single USB drive and a note, "This is only the beginning." I plugged the drive into my laptop, heart pounding, and found encrypted files detailing a covert operation to replicate the Virgil node technology overseas, spearheaded by factions connected to my father and Emery. Evidence emerged of illegal transfers, bribery, and corporate espionage, and his name was dragged through headlines alongside terms like fraud, conspiracy, and national security threat. But what hurt most wasn't the public humiliation. It was knowing that this man had once been my brother and that he was willing to destroy everything, including family, to gain control. I spent hours in meetings with lawyers, security experts, and government officials working to secure the node and prevent any further attempts to exploit it. The quarantine protocols my grandfather had designed were tested rigorously, and new safeguards were implemented to shield the technology from external threats. The estate in Vermont was fortified, and I hired a team of trusted operatives, people with integrity and skill to protect the node and the people connected to it. Emery, meanwhile, was increasingly isolated. His assets were frozen, his communications monitored. Friends turned away, and former allies distanced themselves. The arrogance and charm that once defined him cracked, replaced by desperation. A federal indictment followed within weeks, charging him with multiple counts of fraud, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy against the United States. The courtroom became the next arena for our conflict. The trials were intense and public, with every detail broadcast live. Witnesses testified about Emery's schemes, his attempts to manipulate family trust documents, and his involvement in covert operations to smuggle technology overseas. Yet, Emery remained defiant, often proclaiming innocence and accusing me of orchestrating a vendetta. But the evidence was overwhelming. One piece stood out, a recorded conversation between Emery and a high-ranking ArcLight operative discussing the planned extraction of the node and the disposal of family liabilities. The phrase cut deep. Family liabilities. Me. I sat in the courtroom every day watching as the man who had mocked me, belittled me, and sought to erase me was dismantled by the truth. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but a profound sorrow. Our father's legacy had become a weapon, and the war was tearing us apart. Meanwhile, Quinn Enterprises struggled to stabilize. Investors were nervous, markets volatile. I worked tirelessly to reassure stakeholders that the company was on a new path, one grounded in transparency, ethics, and innovation. I launched a new division dedicated to the node's research, staffed with independent scientists and ethicists aiming to fulfill Henry Quinn's vision of technology that served humanity, not power. The media buzzed about the redemption arc of Ellery Quinn, the once overlooked son who had taken back his family's name and changed its course. I rarely engaged with the spotlight, focusing instead on rebuilding. One evening, as I walked the grounds of Ardenmore, the Vermont dusk settling around me like a soft blanket, I received a call from Caroline. "Ellery, you need to see this." On my laptop, she streamed a breaking news segment. Emery had pleaded guilty to several charges in a plea deal designed to reduce his sentence. The deal included full cooperation with authorities and a public apology to the family and Quinn Enterprises. I watched the footage, Emery's eyes sunken, his voice weary. "I was blinded by ambition and greed," he said. "I betrayed my family, and for that, I am sorry." The apology was a step toward closure, but not forgiveness. I had spent years waiting for an acknowledgement that might never come, and even now, hearing it felt hollow. But the legal resolution freed me to focus on the future instead of the past. Over the following months, I spearheaded initiatives to open the node's research to global experts, establishing collaborations with universities and independent labs. We developed energy solutions, medical devices, and communication systems that began to prove the node's transformative potential. The public's perception shifted from skepticism to cautious optimism. Yet, even as progress flourished, I remained vigilant. Caroline uncovered further attempts by remnants of ArcLight and Emory's associates to access the node, leading to swift interventions and arrests. It became clear the battle was not just about technology, but ideology, the fight between control and stewardship. One crisp autumn morning, standing at the cabin's porch, watching the sun filter through golden leaves, I reflected on the journey. The years that followed were both a quiet victory and a constant challenge. Quinn Enterprises had evolved from a family empire torn apart by greed into a beacon of innovation and ethical responsibility. The Virgil node, once a secret locked away beneath a forgotten cabin, had become a catalyst for global advancements, clean energy breakthroughs, revolutionary medical therapies, and communication technologies that connected communities long isolated. I spent countless hours overseeing the research teams, navigating complex political landscapes, and ensuring that every decision honored the promise my grandfather made decades before. But perhaps the greatest transformation was within myself. I was no longer the boy who had silently accepted his exile, nor the man who fought only to claim what was denied to him. I had become a guardian, not of property or profit, but of a legacy that carried the weight of hope, trust, and responsibility. The cabin in Jefferson Hollow, my once reluctant inheritance, had been transformed into a research retreat and educational center dedicated to inspiring young minds, especially those from backgrounds like mine, those overlooked and underestimated. On the day we inaugurated the Virgil Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing technology for the public good, I stood on the podium in front of a crowd filled with scientists, philanthropists, and young students eager to learn. The old woods behind me whispered in the breeze as I spoke. "I wasn't always the person standing before you," I told them. "There was a time when I was the forgotten son, the one given a cabin as a quiet exile. But that cabin held a secret, one that carried the hopes and dreams of my family and, I believe, the future of humanity." I paused and looked out over the faces, young, bright, determined, and continued. "This foundation is more than just a building or technology. It's a promise. A promise that the power we create will never be used to divide or destroy. That the greatest legacies are those that lift others up, not tear them down. That the true strength of a family, a company, or a community lies not in wealth or dominance, but in integrity, courage, and compassion." The applause was warm and steady, but it was the quiet moments afterward that mattered most. I wandered the halls of the foundation, hearing laughter and excited discussions about science and invention. I saw students from all walks of life working together, sharing ideas, breaking barriers. I knew then that the fight with Emory, the legal battles, and the dark days of betrayal had led to this, a legacy reborn not from conflict, but from commitment to a better future. Late that evening, alone on the porch of the restored cabin, I pulled out the old silver cube, the final key. I held it carefully, feeling its subtle pulse, the echo of generations past. I whispered a silent thank you to Henry, to my father, and even, in a way, to Emory, for forcing me to rise and claim what was mine, not by birthright, but by choice. As the stars emerged overhead, clear and bright, I realized the journey was never about possession. It was about purpose, and I had finally found mine. I closed my eyes and let the quiet wash over me, the quiet of a legacy fulfilled, of battles won without bloodshed, and of a future where technology serves humanity's highest ideals. In the end, it wasn't about who got the mansion or who inherited the cabin. It was about who chose to stand for something greater. And that was a choice I would make every day for the rest of my life. The end. If you stayed with me this far, thank you. It means a lot. If this story touched you or kept you hooked, I'd really appreciate it if you hit like and subscribe. There's plenty more to come, and your support keeps me going. I'm curious, what part of the story grabbed you the most? Was it the family drama, the secret technology, or the way everything unfolded? Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. It's always amazing to hear from people across the world who connect with this journey. Thanks again for listening to my story.